Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, thank you guys for having us to present our new permit. We really enjoy being able to put faces to names. My name is Kirstin Victorella. I am a permit writer with the Bureau of Surface Water and Pretreatment Permitting with the Department of Environmental Protection. I'm joined here today with my colleagues, my supervisor, Dwayne Kabeski, my Bureau Chief, Brett Callanan, and a representative from the Division of Science and Research, Rob Newby. So let me give you a little bit of background of how we got here. The department was made aware that we were having unpermitted discharges of biological and chemical products to surface waters of the state. Under the Clean Water Act, any discharge of a pollutant needs to be permitted underneath the NIFTY's permits, or as we call them, NJPTs. Due to these products not being FIFRA labeled, for those of you who don't know, FIFRA is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. They were not eligible for authorization underneath our pesticides application discharge permit. So, in coordination with the Division of Science and Research, we developed the Harmful Algal Bloom Master General Permit. So this permit authorizes the application of certain biological and chemical products to the surface waters of the state. The products are limited to those found in Appendix B of the permit. The department decided that these products were used similarly and were eligible for coverage underneath a master permit. The department issued our draft on April 24th, which then began our 30-day public comment period, which then subsequently ended on May 24th. We then finally issued the permit final on May 31st of last year, which went effective July 1st of last year. So here are the eligible activities underneath this permit. So the authorized products may be applied to lakes and ponds classified as Category 2 waters. Other water body applications are considered on a case-by-case basis.
Excuse me, Kirsten, what does Category 2 body of water?
So a Category 2 body of water, hold on, let me show you a nice little picture. So those would be our, what's the best way to define a Category 2 water? Anyone? These are just our lakes and ponds that are considered outstanding national resource waters, which would be like our fresh waters you can see on the map in that light blue, and our pinelands waters. So all of your lakes and ponds, including the state-owned ones, would be considered a Category 2 water.
So you don't have to worry about that.
Yes?
Even if it has Category 1 tributaries?
Because this is limited to lakes and ponds, we are not necessarily looking to see if it's a Category 1 tributary. Sir, you had a question?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So the eligible applicants in this permit would be the operator. The operator must assume full responsibility for permit conditions, and they must meet one of the following criteria. So if the entity has control over financing or decision-making, that would be one criteria, or if you are in charge of day-to-day control of the performed activities. So, as lake associations, you would apply as an operator. We also have the option for our for-hire applicator. This would be a Princeton Hydro, Lake Management Sciences, or pest control companies. Please keep in mind, an operator may possess a valid commercial pesticides license. If they do not, they must hire for-hire applicator. So, the operators in this case would be you guys. You would come to me, you would apply for this permit, and I'm assuming most of you do not have this valid license, so then you would go out and hire Fred or Chris over here to take control of the day-to-day activity. Or, in the case, the for-hire applicator can apply as the operator if they possess this license, but please be aware that that means that they are taking full responsibility for these permit conditions. All right, now how to apply. What you're gonna do is you're gonna go to the department website, you're gonna find our bureau. Underneath our HAB section, you'll find the NJPTs 1 and HAB supplemental form, which must be submitted to the department at least 30 days prior to the authorized activity. You can email this to our mailbox, habgp@dep.nj.gov, www.ps.gov, and please ensure that your forms are signed. Now I know what you're asking. What if I want to use a different product or treat a different water body that was originally authorized on my application? What you're going to do is you're going to submit another supplemental form to me specifying the requested products and/or the water body and any pre-application monitoring that's required at least 30 days prior to product application. We do have some visual monitoring requirements in this permit. Product application is absolutely prohibited if you see a visibly distressed, dead, non-targeted organism. Visual surveillance must be conducted prior, during, and after product application to make sure that we are not having any adverse incidents. Yes?
Can you just expand a little bit on the dead organism? Like, what is that in plain language?
So if you had like a fish kill, even an overabundance of like floating water grass flying around, anything that looks wrong, that could potentially be exacerbated by the application of these products. I'm sure we've all seen some sort of lake or pictures of lakes that have all of these fish dead or any organisms that aren't supposed to be dead. We also have a public notification and signage. So signs have to be posted to the treatment sites at least 24 hours prior to product application. They can be removed no sooner than 72 hours after the completion of the authorized activity. The operator is also required to publish in a public or weekly newspaper, at least for 1 day, that states that you requested authorization under this permit from the department. This would be an example of what the signs would look like.
Kirstin, there are so few newspapers left. Those type of rules coming out from the state, not for your department, but the departments, they have to catch up with reality.
So our Pesticides Bureau also has similar requirements for pesticide application, and this is to ensure the enduring protection of our surface waters. Yes?
Is it safe to say that the water treatment company staples paper to posts all over the neighborhood is sufficient?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes?
Can I just get clarification? If I hire someone
Mhm.
to do this application, as the lake, do I need to file for this permit, or does the person that has the operator, the licensed operator, have this already done?
So this would be a discussion between you and the operator, or the applicator, I apologize.
Yeah.
Yep, so that would be a decision that would be made between the two of you. The stress on that is that whoever is the operator is responsible for the permit compliance. So that's a discussion you would need to have with the applicator.
So if you hire someone, they could file it, but they may want you to file it.
Mhm.
You're telling me.
Yep,
Okay.
yes?
I'd like to get back to the idea about the newspaper. We don't have local newspapers. So, but we do have a website for our community. So most people basically get their information on their phone or their computer. So could that be amended, not just for a newspaper, but for a community website?
The department can take that into consideration. We do understand that a newspaper is kind of outdated, yeah. But the counties do all have individual newspapers that would also be acceptable.
But for example, New Jersey's largest newspaper, the Star Ledger, is no longer available in print. It's only online. So if New Jersey's largest newspaper is not available in print, I don't understand why the DEP can't amend that as soon as possible for digital electronic news sources.
We'll definitely take that into consideration. This is in accordance with some of our regulations. So we do understand that it might be burdensome, and we will definitely.
It's impossible. It's impossible.
So all of the newspapers, the Star Ledger does post online.
Excuse me. Everybody, I think the idea is we need to focus on the presentation, not how we get the newspapers done, the Star Ledger's out of business. We all get it.
And there is temporary legislation right now about publications. I'm going to look it up, and while the presenter is presenting it, I'll clarify that afterwards.
Thank you. Yes?
I see the signage. Now, would that signage go where we would normally post water treatment around the lake? And then would there have to be a universal signage on every communally owned property? Like if you had a clubhouse, if there was a fire lane, would it have to Are there, you know?
Yep, that would be exactly how you usually see the signs posted around your neighborhoods.
Okay.
Yes?
You said that you have to apply for the permit 30 days before treatment. Well, if you have a HAB, then you need to treat quickly, right? So are you suggesting, we can't wait for a day to treat, are you suggesting that we file the permit in the beginning of the season just proactively in case we have a bloom?
So, these products really are to prevent a HAB from occurring. So you apply them earlier in the season for phosphorus sequestration and nutrient inactivation. These aren't like your regular pesticides, your copper, you see a HAB and you throw it in the water. These are definitely a prior to a HAB happening products.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Yes?
Will you be able to, in your slide deck, list some of those products? Are they listed? Thank you.
We'll get to that. We also have some reporting requirements. Results for all that visual monitoring that was conducted must be submitted to the department within 30 days of completion of the authorized activity. Both short and long-term water quality monitoring results must be submitted within 30 days after all sampling is completed. And an annual report must be submitted no later than December 31st of the application year. This helps the department understand if there's anything going wrong in your application of your authorized products. And then I'm gonna switch things over to Rob for a little more in-depth about our water quality sampling.
Can I ask you a reporting question first,
Yes.
please? And this might sound a little detailed, but on one of the documents, you say we have to submit 30 days in advance. It says to submit the monitoring data. That doesn't make sense if the monitoring is post-treatment, like your two middle bullets. Even if it's pre-treatment, this is March, so we don't have any data yet, but yet we'd like to be proactive and submit the permit. So is it pre-monitoring data or post that you're looking for?
So the monitoring requirements are outlined in Appendix B of our permit. We have both short-term and long-term monitoring. They're in set intervals. We have stuff for prior, during application, a month after application, then we have long-term, which is 2 to 11 months after the whole completed activity. So it really just depends on when you complete that short-term monitoring, you get that over to us. The pre-application monitoring must be collected before you are even authorized for that permit. So what you do is you collect that sampling before you even submit the application, and then you send that in with your application.
But what if our current water parameters aren't yet where they would be if we wanted to, say, submit or apply Utrazor, because we're not seeing an uptick in phosphorus yet, but we're 30 days prior and we're trying to be proactive?
This is more of a proactive thing. We're just seeing if the water body at that time can handle the application of the authorized product.
Okay.
We want to avoid any toxic incidents. Rob?
And I'll kind of go a bit more to your question. I'll go a bit more into some of the sampling requirements. I will. So I'm going to go a bit more into the sampling requirements in a couple of slides. So good morning, everybody. My name is Rob Newby. I am with our Division of Science and Research. So I am going to talk a bit more about water quality and sampling in terms of monitoring and what comes to the Division of Science and Research before it goes to our permitting program and sort of the reason and rationale behind this. So as was mentioned, sort of the first golden rule of everything is we really want to avoid doing any kind of ecological harm, right? Now, no one in this room goes into this wanting to do anything bad, right? We're all on the same page. We all want what's best for our water bodies, right? And that's sort of the mindset that we go into from the DEP perspective as well, in terms of how we try to construct this permit, is that we have a monitoring requirement because unlike FIFRA labeled products, which is the Federal Insecticide, Rodenticide, and Fungicide Act, right? These products don't make any pesticidal claims. So a pesticidal claim means it kills something. It says it right on the label. So if you go into the grocery store and you want to kill ants, you want to kill rats, or you want to do something, it says on the label how much of this you have to put down to kill that organism. Any of the products that we're talking about do not make that claim on the label. However, just by how they work, there is unfortunately going to be death in terms of either the microorganisms or even up to fish or other types of life that is associated with the water body, right? So with a nutrient inactivator like alum, alum is removing phosphorus from the water column. Phosphorus is a food source. If you suddenly remove all of the food source from organisms, they don't have a means to survive. So you want to be very careful and targeted how you apply these things, right? So where this comes into sort of a conflict is that many of these products don't make an outright pesticidal claim. Therefore, EPA doesn't regulate them under FIFRA. But because they are technically a discharge, they're classified under the Clean Water Act. So when you're reading a pesticidal label, which is what is shown up on here from EPA, it lists out the actual composition, tells you how much is in there, tells you application, tells you dose rate, it tells you safety instructions, right? Now this is a FIFRA labeled product, right? So you as an applicator, you as an operator, or you as a homeowner or lake association can see this on the label. So copper, peroxide, right? Things that typically make a claim that they are going to kill something tells you directly on the label, right? These products that are in the sheet do not do that. They don't contain this safety information. Oftentimes they contain proprietary information that's known only to the company. So what happens is that when it comes to application, we can't apply an unknown, right? No one wants to apply an unknown goop or unknown solution to their body of water, right? That's bad news. So we group these products based on what their claim is, how they are supposed to work. So there are two large groups in terms of how these products work and their mechanisms of action. One is they bind up nutrients, and nutrients in this context are going to be things like phosphorus, nitrogen. This is the food for algae. Now algae, they're photosynthetic. They don't need carbon like we need carbon and sugar, right? They serve as that carbon source for larger organisms. So that algae serves as a food source for something larger. That something larger serves as a food source for something even bigger, and it goes all the way up the food web, right? So algae often, and some bacteria, there's what we call primary producers. They bring the energy into the system. You want them there. You don't want them to become overgrowing, and that's what we refer to, and as Fred referred to them, as a harmful algal bloom, right? So you can apply these products to control the nutrients. And by controlling the nutrients, you limit the amount of available growth material for them to possibly grow. You're basically limiting the amount of food for them, right? So alum, Phoslock, Utrazorb, right? These are examples of these types of products because what their claim is that they are going to bind nutrients and make them unavailable for algae, cyanobacteria, and other photosynthetic organisms, even aquatic plants, to grow. And I'll discuss the chemistry behind this and why alum in particular is of a concern. And then we have biologics, and oftentimes you will see biologics making claims like this will degrade your muck, this will clear your water, right? These are products that contain either enzyme blends, they're often marketed as probiotics, right? And what they are is they are either enzymes that are taken from living things and put into a blend, or they are living bacteria, yeast, and other things that are put into bodies of water so that they can compete for that same nutrient pool. So when you have two things that are growing at the same time, competing for the same pool of nutrients, the idea is that the faster growing organism is going to win, right? And that's the idea behind these biologic products. Unfortunately, when it comes to the biologic products, again, many of the vendors and manufacturers do not tell you on the label what it is that they contain. So that's a concern because if there's no good quality assurance or no good quality control with that, you can introduce things that are harmful, like pathogens, that are not harmful necessarily to you, but harmful to aquatic life. And that's where the concern sort of overlaps. So I mentioned alum, And alum is a commonly applied product that tries to bind up and inactivate available phosphorus. Phosphorus is one of the largest contributing sources for nutrient-driven growth for algae and cyanobacteria. So what is alum? Alum is one of these things that's been widely used as a coagulant. And a coagulant basically makes something that is in water and makes it no longer in water, it makes it insoluble. So when you add alum to water that has a lot of phosphorus, it forms what's called a flock or a clump, right? Alum is not a thing, it could be multiple things, but it's an aluminum salt. And keep in mind, this is the sort of magic behind the science. It is acidic. So many of you have measured your water chemistry at your lakes. So you know roughly what the pH is of your water body, right? So your water should be averaging somewhere between, I'm going to take a rough guess in the dark here, roughly between 6 and 8 on an average, right, any given day. Alum solution will bring that pH down dramatically, right? And unless your lake has good buffering capacity, that pH might not rise back up. And that's what a concern might be, right? So one of the things that we require and comes into this is that it requires a pre-monitoring proposal that's submitted to the department that includes something called a jar or settling test. This is where you take a sample and you add alum to a dose till you begin to see what is the rate in which you see this flock appear. Now, you aren't going to do this, the operator or the applicator is going to do this, right? This tells us, as the department, this is the maximum dose that is needed to be applied to inactivate the phosphorus in that body of water, right? And that is what's submitted to us and evaluated. Alum has restrictions and has monitoring requirements, not just in New Jersey, but across all 48 contiguous states. It is subject to timing restrictions, and it's usually timed around fish spawns. Now, most of the states that we surveyed usually time it around periods around early spring and fall, so that you kind of are restricted in terms of your applying time span there, but not every state does this. One of the other considerations that you want to look at is you want to ensure that you're not applying it when you have a lot of plant biomass, because a lot of plants that are present are going to interfere with that reaction I mentioned. When you add alum to the water column, it's going to want to form that clump. If there's a lot of plants there, it's not going to form that as effectively. And now you have aluminum or alum sitting in your water at the sediment top, or at the sediment water interface, the top layer, that doesn't have a job to do, right? And the concern is that anytime the lake mixes, or anytime that you have any kind of event, you end up with aluminum, now free, in the water column, right? One of the most widely monitored things when it comes to alum is pH, because the reaction between that aluminum and phosphorus is pH sensitive. And I remember I mentioned that alum is pH sensitive, or it's acidic, right? As that flock begins to form, that becomes water insoluble. It eventually finds its way into the sediment, locks into the sediment, and it removes that available phosphorus from being able to be released. If the pH begins to drop down, that aluminum is going to release that phosphate, or that phosphorus, and that phosphorus is now available to go back into the water. So the reaction that's between alum and phosphorus is strong, but it's not unbreakable. So pH is one of the most widely recommended and required monitoring requirements, so that we understand that if the pH begins to drop, something else might have to be added to the body of water, like a buffering agent, to help bring the pH back up. And there are additional water quality parameters, things like dissolved organic carbon, hardness, total and recoverable aluminum, and this again because alum is aluminum, right? And other biological parameters are often called out from other states.
You know, you mentioned in the beginning that a lot of the things that could be applicated to a lake are not broken down in their chemical formula. Now, if we wanted to know what that was, do we send a sample to the state, or is it basically, you know, if you don't know, you don't tell, because, you know.
So right now how it's working is that we have the the vendor or we have the manufacturer submit to us what is in the product, and we evaluate based on what's submitted, right? And for some of the products, there is confidential disclosure agreements that we sign, so that we know what's in them, and then we write a product sheet based on the mode of action and what chemistry they provide to us. So let's say, for an example, there are a couple of vendors that follow this nutrient inactivation. So very similar to how alum works by binding phosphorus, but slightly different types of chemicals. So it's not aluminum based, it's something different, right?
Is there a disclosure requirement for the lake, so we know what we're putting in our lake?
So that's up to the vendor. If the vendor wants to disclose to you what the composition is, but on the label, it will not tell you. It will tell you the mechanism of action.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And that kind of goes into the reason as to why we have some monitoring that's in there. So with the monitoring, for alum in particular, we have pretty robust data. Alum has been applied for decades, right? It's been applied since at least the 80s. It's probably one of the earliest reports that we had for in-lake applications for use of water or use for nutrient control purposes. Unfortunately, with such a robust data set, you also have both the good and the bad. And with the bad, like I mentioned, one of the things you try to avoid is you try to avoid that wide pH shift, because as you have that wide pH shift, you now have aluminum that's being released, and aluminum can be toxic. And there's been documented cases around the country where as you have that pH drop, aluminum gets released, and now you have fish kills associated with both the decrease in pH and now suddenly an aluminum spike, right? So it's led to fish kills and invertebrate deaths, right? So no one wants to see that. Everyone wants to sort of avoid having that happen when you're trying to just inactivate the nutrients to restore water quality. So monitoring is designed to be able to slow down or possibly evaluate treatment before irreversible harm occurs. Unfortunately, when it comes to these things, once it's in the water, we can't pull it back out, right? So once you add many of these products, it's a bell you can't unring. Once that happens though, we can monitor and we can try to take corrective actions. One of the things we might say is you can't apply anymore. Alum is one of those products. So alum, we calculate the maximum dose that can be applied, and then you can't apply anymore, right? So you can't say, I'm gonna add, this amount of alum this year, if it's already a maximum dose, and say, well, next year I'm gonna add more, right? You might have to switch to a different product if you're not seeing the phosphorus control that you wanna see, right? And this is the reason why we encourage lake associations to engage with applicators so that they can best sort of understand what is going to work for them. So what are the monitoring things that are called out specifically in the permit? There are things like water quality parameters. These are going to tell us the physical and chemical conditions of the water, things like pH, temperature, your dissolved oxygen in terms of concentration, your conductivity, your total alkalinity, dissolved organic carbon, and your Secchi depth, right? Many of these you're very familiar with. And then some have very specific, did you have a question? Okay.
Yeah, just, do you need to know the volume capacity of the body of water or just the surface?
So in the permit, in terms of the monitoring, there's a call out specifically based on the size of the body of water, right? So you don't have to know necessarily the volume, but in some of the products you do have to know volume specific calculations, right? So again, this is one of the reasons why as a applicator, right, it's called out in the product. It all depends on your application, right? So if you're treating a whole lake, yes, you have to know the volume, right? If you're treating a partial area, it might be more might be better in terms of knowing the area that you're applying or where the area of drift might be.
And that may be different between the
Yes.
alum or the phosphor.
Yes, 100%. Yep. All right. Then there's product-specific monitoring, right? So every product is slightly different. Like I had mentioned, alum is aluminum, right? Utrazorb is a lanthanum-based composition, right? So they are completely different chemicals. So you're not going to measure aluminum if you're applying Utrazorb, right? Or Foslock, right? They're the same kind of composition. Then you have products that can cause, basically we have biological monitoring is also tied into this. This can cause, we monitor the biologics because what we're trying to do is we're trying to ensure that there's no phenomenon that we know as an ecological cascade. So your algae, your cyanobacteria, they're the initial linchpin of growth and support in your water bodies. We're trying to control their growth, yes. But if you suddenly kill all of them, now what they do is they serve as the food source for your zooplankton. Your zooplankton serve as the food source for your predatory fish, right, or your next layer up. If there's no food, everyone suffers, right? So we try to limit as best we possibly can the effects of these things to ensure that they're recovering and what their baseline level is. Okay, so this is an example of what's called out specifically in the permit. And again, each product has a specific requirement. So in the permit, you can see what's called out. But this is a general table. So you can see, again, like I mentioned, water, temperature, dissolved oxygen, concentration, pH, conductivity, alkalinity, hardness, DOC, dissolved and total recoverable aluminum, total phosphorus, SECI, zooplankton counts, and cyanobacteria species. Okay. I know, it's a lot, I know. Don't worry, there won't be a pop quiz at the end.
Can I just ask you a question on that previous slide?
You can ask whatever question you like.
All right, so if I send you April 1,
Yep.
all those parameters, including a cell count,
Yep.
but I don't want to apply my product till, say, June or July,
Mhm.
that's okay? Because my cyanobacteria and my pH, all those parameters, are going to change.
Oh yeah, they will absolutely. And I'm going to defer to our permit because some of them are different. Some of them are required day before in terms of application. Some of them are okay. It depends on the product, correct? Am I understanding that? Yes, okay.
I just want to interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
Folks, I know a lot of you were taking pictures or straining to see the screen, and Sebastian, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the slide deck will be available on the website in just a couple of days, so you don't need to necessarily strain to take pictures.
Yeah, and you can always email us as well. You know, we do work for the Department of Environmental Protection, and we are public servants, so feel free to email us and bug us. We are here for you.
These are a lot of added requirements for lake communities, which are mostly not-for-profit organizations, so, tax credits wouldn't be something that would be something we could apply for. But is there a plan to any kind of state rebates or grants? Because all these waters are tributaries to state waters and reservoirs, but the burden on protecting this water body is up to the private associations, which the cost continually goes up. So is there any plan for any kind of state action to have some kind of rebate program or something, a percentage of this cost?
So I'm going to defer to my colleagues in permitting to see in terms of that. I don't know necessarily because, again, I'm the scientist, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask this question to. But I something we can definitely follow up with. I don't know if they're aware, but they would definitely know more than I would.
To back up what you said is that we're constantly told that we own the lake bottom, but the state owns the water, and yet the state is now requiring us to hold a higher and higher standard for water treatment. It seems to me the burden should be on the state if they wish to have us treat the water at our expense as we're nonprofits. I mean, that's just a statement.
No, it's fair. It's a very fair statement. That's fair.
I didn't expect
All right.
you as a scientist.
No, it's fine.
Because I would have got phosphorus as a reply and you would have lost me.
No. All right. So, kind of wrapping up a little bit more in terms of, where you should sample. All right, so in the permit, it's called out specifically. Locations are meant to be representative of where you're applying. So we call out based on water body size, and you can find this in Appendix B in the HAB Master Permit, based on May 31st of last year. And time frame is meant to be a window that captures when the product is supposed to be most effective. So there's both a short-term and long-term portion that's in there. And then products that are specifically called out in there in the permit are alum and polyaluminum coagulants, or PACL, right? We don't really see much in terms of PACL being used, but it is something that has been used across the country, right? So alum and PACL work pretty much identically. So their mechanisms of action and chemistry is pretty close. Utrizorb and then Phoslock, again, these are alternates. They both work by inactivating phosphorus. And then our biologicals, these are going to be things like your microlifes, your muckaways, your nature blends, and your pond clears. These are your products that contain either enzymes or bacteria or yeast blends. Okay. All right.
I'm sorry, what's the biologics? Should they out compete and put it, someone put in too much? Should they out compete the native biologics?
And that was definitely the concern. So the reason why biologics were included as part of this is that there was a compliance and enforcement rule that was put in after 2019, which basically put a stop on biologics because many of these don't contain the bacteria or yeast or whatever the species composition is, right? So from a state perspective, that has a huge ecological concern to us because, again, many of these are based on a label where you can just take a scoop of powder, throw it into some lake water, and then let it sit in a gallon bucket or gallon jar, and then throw it back into the water body, right? So dosing isn't exact, right? So to answer your question, can you overdose? Yes. Is there harm that we've seen that's been reported in terms of the scientific literature? Not yet, but that is very, very limited. So many of these products are still very, very new, right? And based on either bench testing or very small data sets, we've not seen anything, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if you just decide, you know what, I've got, unlimited money and I'm gonna just, replace all of the bacteria with these products, right? Then nothing bad is going to happen, right? A lot of these systems, right? So nutrient cycling in a water body is a very, very delicate balance. If you begin to tip the scales in one way, you can irreversibly cause that system to just crash out, right? And it takes a long time for that recovery to happen. And we try to avoid that as best we possibly can.
Hey Rob, real quick, you had mentioned frequency and sizing.
Yep.
Do you have that chart up there on the lake sampling?
It is. Yeah.
It is. Okay.
Yeah. So it's called out specifically in the permit.
Right, but will you, is that in part of your presentation? Is that coming?
So, I have I don't have the size
Okay.
on here off the top of my head. I think the maximum number is 7 based on the largest body of water. But in the permit we can discuss it. I can pull up the permit in a little bit.
So my question goes to, obviously, some of these sampling sites, multiple samples, specifically when you get down to even smaller water bodies of 20 acres or less.
Yep.
So as a client or as a homeowner that owns detention basin, something that's highly nutrient rich.
Yep.
Sampling a 1 acre or half acre or 3 acre pond 3 times, has the state looked at that and said, well, wait a second, maybe we ought to readdress this? Or is that going to be?
So I will say that it is under evaluation. There were comments that were received both from the last public comment period and from just the last round when the permit was open, and it is under consideration for the evaluation for sampling frequency and location.
Okay. Is the state looking to amend some of this permitting? Is it like a thought process, or is this, honestly, like, is this, it just came out in mid-July, so the question is, like, we're thinking about things, and is it an opportunity for the state to amend?
Yes, to amend, yeah.
So
to do a major mod to the master permit, but, all, like Rob said, all the considerations that we've talked to Fred, and,
So for those who can hear, the answer is yes, they are looking to do a major modification to the permit. Okay?
That's a concern of a lot of people here. As the one who's actually applying it and presenting this to the clients, they were like, whoa, what's going on here?
How much does the permit cost?
It is free. So, all right, so the question is how much does it cost in terms of testing, right? It depends on the product that you're looking to apply. So for alum, some of the testing is going to be like looking for like aluminum. It depends on the lab that you're using, right? I don't know what the cost is off the top of my head, right? But again, for a private lab to do the total and recoverable aluminum, it's for a one time or for a number of site testing, you are going to incur an expense, but you have that baseline data, right? And again, for a whole lake application, you calculate the maximum dose. It's one and done for that initial data set. So it is an expense. I do acknowledge that.
I've heard that it could be up to $8,000 to $9,000 worth of water testing to support these permits. Is that far off in your mindset?
I mean, it depends on the product, right? So for something like the biologics, I don't think it's going to be $8,000 to $9,000, depending on what you're monitoring, and it also depends on the size of your water body, right? So if you're doing a whole lake application of something like this, then yes, I can see how that could be $8,000 to $9,000 in monitoring. But if you're doing like a small cove, again, it greatly depends on which of the products we're talking about in terms of the cost. But that's a conversation you'd be having with the applicator or with the lab.
So with that being said, the water bodies are, the way the frequency is set up in the permit, the application, if it is a 20-acre lake and we're doing a 1-acre cove, are you sampling the entire 20 acres for that 1 acre treatment, or is it focused on the treatment area?
So right now, it's called out specifically for the size of the water body, not for the size of the application. And again, it's under consideration for the revision, for the major mod, for it to be revised.
Do we see that major revision occurring this season?
Hoping so, but can't make it up now.
50-50, or is it a?
You say 50-50.
I'm not sure. You tell me.
No, I'm saying, yeah, it's possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are peroxide products included in this permit?
So peroxide, so the question is, are peroxide products included in this permit? Peroxide makes a pesticidal claim, and peroxide is labeled under FIFRA, so peroxide is not included. For that, you would consult with the pesticides arm of the department, and you would pull a pesticides permit for that, which has additional monitoring and other notice requirements, which I'm not adequately here to talk about. Could be another conversation for another day. All right, so the currently authorized products, like I mentioned, are things like alum, Pacol, Utrazor, Foslock, and the biologics. And again, their claims are to basically inactivate nutrients or to outcompete the algae or cyanobacteria that are there. And then in your product sheets, these are going to be in the general permit. These are products that are allowable under the under the permit. They're going to be found in Appendix B of the permit. So if you have a question about, well, what does this product contain, you can consult Appendix B where applicable. If we are allowed to disclose the product composition or mode of action, we do so in Appendix B. Each individual product sheet tells you how do you apply it, right? And usually the permit is written in such a way to give you the instructions based on the information that's provided to the department. So it includes the specific information in terms of water quality parameters that are supposed to be monitored, number of samplings, and whether or not, if you requires digital calibrations of meters. And an example of this is shown on the left. It's very blurry, unfortunately, because it's a screenshot, but you can consult the permit, permit online if you want to see an example of that. Okay. And then the question is, it's like, okay, well, that's great, but I want to use something that's not on that list. Great. So right now, we're not reviewing things, but that will change. You can submit requests to the department to the same portal that you would submit your permit to. So that can be submitted to habgp@dep.nj.gov. And then once it's there, the permit program will submit it over to the Division of Science and Research, where we will evaluate. We will be conducting and consulting with the vendor or with the manufacturer for additional information. Right, because oftentimes, again, like what they give you is a sheet that is not meant for scientists or not meant for the public, right? And we need to know a bit more. So we have to know exactly chemical composition. We have to know what information led them to understand what's the dosing rate, right? So what information they have that they don't want the general public necessarily to know or necessarily put out for their competitors to use, but we need that information so that we can understand why these products are making the claims they're making. With that, thank you for letting me kind of go on about alum. Hopefully you learned something. So, but I'll take any questions. I saw you in the door.
One last thought. I'm wondering, when it comes to the nutrient encapsulants and the biological, is it one or the other? Like Utrazor plus a microlite clear, is that workable?
Yeah, absolutely, right. And oftentimes you will see that these products are kind of used in conjunction. There is sometimes specific call-outs for timing restrictions for both products, right? Depending on if you're also applying a registered pesticide, there's also call-outs specifically. So if you're using something like copper or peroxide, right, there might be interactions or contradictions, we call them, right? So you want to avoid applying a product that has a pesticidal claim and something like alum or Foslock or Utrazor or something like that. You're welcome.
And is the permit good for a year? Or how long is it good for?
5 years? It's good for 5 years.
Okay, so whatever you want to do will have to be 5 years.
All new gypsies permits have a 5-year period on them. So once you apply for the permit and get your authorization, that permit will be good for 5 years, but please remember that it's only good for 5 years with whatever products are authorized under your individual authorization.
So you have to apply, yeah, you have to apply for a specific product.
Yes, a specific product and a specific water
And
quality.
if you wanted to try something different because the first product didn't work right, you have to apply again, go through the whole testing, water testing.
Yes.
Yes, Chris.
So, in terms of monitoring, if we are in a maintenance, if we are, so this question's gonna go towards monitoring. If we are into a monitoring protocol, they set up as a permit set up, but you're in a maintenance program of low dose applications once or twice a season, or maybe 3 times a season, or a lake like this system here where they're doing, continual. How does that, obviously the monitoring here doesn't work with that scenario. So how do we go about it?
So to answer your question, Chris, this has been, so Fred and Steve Souza submitted these systems, so for alum in particular, right? So alum is one of these systems. So the question is that if you are applying these products in low dose, or let's say at a continual frequency, right? So my understanding is like Mohawk has a continual low dose alum.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, let me add a little to this. So
Sure.
there are really 3 ways you can use nutrient inactivants, particularly alum. One is the classic standard control the internal load, like Rob was describing. We actually did that at Lake Apatcon last fall. I have some photos of that. So that, this permit process is very appropriate for that type of internal control. And then, what Chris is talking about is more of a localized phosphorus stripping. And this is something some of the water utilities are concerned about, that instead of using copper to kill the algae, usually in the spring or early summer, you have a lot of dissolved phosphorus. Can you use those low dose treatments of a nutrient inactivator to just treat not the whole lake, but just a section of it? So that's why, your question came up about if you're treating, say you have a 700-acre lake and you're treating 20 acres, do you have to do the sampling for the entire lake, or do you just focus on that cove? So that's the second way you can do it. So one is internal load, the other is phosphorus stripping in a selective area, and then the third that was mentioned, like here at Mohawk, that's been in operation since 1993, is an alum injection system that puts in very, very low dose concentrations of alum. Like you have a big storm event, you have a flush of phosphorus coming in, that injection system inactivates that phosphorus in the water column. So these 2 types of nutrient inactivants are very different than that standard internal load. So to circle back to your question, I guess, and that's what we've been working with DEP, what type of monitoring is appropriate for those types of strategies, because particularly if you're just doing a select area, do you need to monitor the whole lake just for that 1 acre or that 1 cove?
What's the answer?
So I will say that the way the permit is structured right now, it's structured in such a way that you would treat them as if they were whole lake applications, right? And the conversations that we've had with other states, they've also struggled with this as well, right? There's only one other state that has a specific call out for low dose alum applications, right? So we've been in talks with them to figure out, and they're just as struggling with these systems as we are, right? So based on your comments that were submitted, you and Steve's comments that were submitted back in the fall, it's under consideration for a way in which these systems might be called out specifically for monitoring. But again, that would be under the major mod, but I can't speak more about that until that is put out there.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just got a question for Fred. That first one you described that you use a Lake Apatcon, where it was an internal load of alum. How physically did you do that?
I will show you in my presentation a little later.
So, I mean, one of the things that we can talk about, and then, Fred and I can nerd out, and, we talk about this all the time, is that nutrient control is not one thing, it's many things, right? You have both internal nutrients that are inherent to the system, and you have external nutrients that come in from like rain events or wash-ins from impervious surface coverage, right? A lot of these products work well for internal control, right? So the systems that Fred was talking about, where you're stripping phosphorus from the water column, or you're adding these low-dose alum injectors to try to catch or capture rain events, these weren't into the department's mind when the permit was written, because they're I don't want to call them fringe, but they're very novel, or they're very sort of low-use applications, right? We're very used to, hey, we want to treat this entire area or this section of a body of water to traditional surface applied applications, right? So that's why it's under review for this season.
So in other words, until a lake that would have, like, say, an automatic feeding system would be approved, then they have to cease using that system, because otherwise they would have to what? Apply, get a grant, or you know what I mean, get approval, turn it on, then turn it off. I mean, is there a grandfather?
So
there?
I can't speak specifically to what the systems that are already in operation are going to happen, but that's one of the things that we have been discussing. Like, what do we do about these systems that are already in operation, right? So until we land on the major mod where we are now, just hang tight. Unfortunately, it's probably the best I can say without poisoning the well too much.
Yeah, in terms of the dose of alum to the lake, and you're looking at total phosphorus as a parameter on your sheet up there. What if a large part of that is organic phosphorus, dissolved organic phosphorus? Does alum have any effect on dissolved organic phosphorus?
No. Yes and no. So, well, yes and no.
Not on
not on organic phosphorus, but you do shift between states,
yes.
right? So it doesn't stay as dissolved organic phosphorus for very long, and if alum is available to bind it, it's going to bind it, right? So it's a yes and no answer to that one. But
let's assume though that it doesn't react well with organic phosphorus, except flocculating the particles if they're solid particles. But you may be overfeeding alum if you don't look at the total equation of what's in the total phosphorus. You should be treating for the SRP and the organic phosphorus if it works. If not,
so I can add to that. So the reason why we use total phosphorus, and Rob touched on this, phosphorus cycles so quickly. So it literally will go into a dissolved state, particulate state, organic, inorganic, so quickly that historically, since the 70s and 80s, when alum has been used, everyone uses total phosphorus for two reasons. Number one, it cycles so quickly. Actually, three reasons. The second reason is when you're adding this, you're really focusing on the dissolved forms that are coming from the sediments. So again, the classic sense of using alum is that dissolved phosphorus that's coming up from the sediments. So that's the second component. And then the third component is really efficiency, that not every aluminum ion is going to bind with a phosphate. So a way of compensating for that is to use total phosphorus as opposed to a fraction of the phosphorus, which is SRP. So historically, when I say historically, since Denny Cook and Gene Welsh were doing treatments in the 70s and 80s, that's the way it was developed.
do you go by the mole ratio, or do you just go by the jar test?
I can talk about the jar test later, but okay. All right, so basically with the jar test, like Rob was mentioning, when you're doing the jar test, you're adding alum into the water and you're watching the pH. As soon as the pH hits 6.2, that's when we stop. Now, like what Rob said, is when you fall below 6, that's when you have that you can have that toxic shift. But again, within the scientific literature, 6.2 is like an added buffer. So if the amount of alum you need to add is here to take care of the algae, but the amount of alum you can safely add is here, you're good. That means you have that buffering capacity. If it's the opposite, if this is how much phosphorus you need to add, this is how much you can safely add, you have to use another product, you have to consider aeration, you have to do something else. And that's why that bench test is so important. It gives you an idea of what the dosage rate should be. And like DEP saying, they want to see that data because they want to make sure that that dosage rate is not going to have the pH go below 6 and have some sort of toxic issue.
The actual solubility of aluminum is quite a bit below 6, though. So what you're given quite a factor of safety there.
It's the way it's been developed since the 70s and 80s.
But I will touch on a bit on Fred, is that we got to remember this is happening in the sediment, and the sediment goes anoxic, right? So you will see those pH drops below 6, somewhat frequently, depending, especially in the growing season. So that if you have the water at a low pH and now you have anoxic zones, you will likely see release of soluble aluminum, right? That's one of the concerns that's been, from Cook and from other states, right? So just historically, that's usually what we end up seeing, or how that ends up happening.
And to add to that,
I saw your question, just so you know.
Oh, just real polyaluminum chloride and their buffered forms of alum. Those products are buffered, so they temper that pH. So the advantage is they temper the pH. The disadvantage is they're a little more expensive than standard alum. So it's like,
you know, it's a cost
What
benefit.
would be the baseline of a lake before treatment? In other words, when you have to worry about the pH, would it be a lake that has 7 pH or 7.5?
Well, like Lake Kapakon at the bottom during the non-growing season, it's still above 6. So we were trying to figure out whether or not at Apakon did we need a buffered product or not. Turned out because of the pH, we could use just standard alum.
I don't think we have to worry at Cold Lake. We're pretty alkaline there.
Again, it depends on the region of New Jersey. Northern New Jersey, a lot of your lakes tend to be more alkaline. If you're along the coast, or obviously the Pinelands, you have a lot of issues with pH.
Yeah.
You were saying you hang tight if you use a low-dose alum system for the mod. Well, when is that expected? We're 6 weeks away from when lakes would have to start low dosing to prevent, you know, a wasted summer, basically. So if they don't come out with this major mod in the next, you know, 3 to 4 weeks, the lakes that would use that system are just can't use it.
Well, I will also add that you are constructing things. It's not just as simple as, like, you know, adding it from the surface. It's actual structures that are going into the bottom. So there's additional permits are typically required for this, right? So it's going to be a HAB master permit that you pull for the alum, but the actual construction, you know, for the actual system is additional work. I don't know how long that permitting process takes place. So I will throw that also out there, right? That you also have, like, you know, consulting things like Fish and Wildlife for adding these things depending on if your body of water, you know,
They're not adding it, like Lake Mohawk has it now.
right. So we're talking about the grandfather systems, right? Again, I can't speak to the timing or what they're going to do with the system, but maybe, you know, the permitting program can talk about that. But, you know, for a brand new system, right? It's not just this permit. You don't just pull this permit and something get approved. There's additional things required.
I was talking about like,
Yeah.
Lake Mohawk.
Just for at least from what I know, right now there are 2 in the state of New Jersey since the 90s. There are 2 operating low-dose alum injection systems. There's a third being designed, but like Rob said, that one is currently under design, and we don't expect that to be in operation for a year or 2 because of the other permits associated with that. But there are 2 that have been in operation since the 90s.
Successfully.
Yes, and they've contributed toward improving water quality.
So going back to, you know, the majority of the people in this room, and I speak for a lot of them because a lot of them are my clients. They're, again, the 2 systems have a, you know, injection system. There's only 2 in the entire state currently, and for the last few decades, working well. But the majority of these people here are looking for the use of nutrient inactivation. Again, back to the question of doing low dose applications over the season, going to the monitoring. Is this a multiplier of, you know, 3 times? Like, how are you going to be looking at this when they're sitting here going from a budgetary standpoint?
So again, Chris, I can't speak too much on it because until the permit is out there, until the public comment period, like, I can't tell you that it's going to go from this to this, right?
I
so,
understand.
but I will tell you that based on conversations with Fred and Steve and others, based on, you know, not just whole lake or partial applications, it is under consideration for a revision for the monitoring and the, you know, sampling parameters. You know, just particularly calling out these low dose or water, like, column specific applications.
Okay. So from a budgetary standpoint, it basically goes down to dollars for everybody in this room who says, wow, wait a second, now this $1,000 treatment is $3,000 in monitoring. Forget it, they're not going to do it. And that really injures state waters, period. So you basically, the way the permit's set up, it's taking a lot of surface water out of nutrient inactivation's ability to actually improve water quality on the state level. So is that going to, I know you can't answer it, but should the clients be preparing themselves for the worst, like, you know, this is almost worst case scenario for a lot of them going, oh shoot, we've been gathering these monies to actually do this nutrient inactivation, and we're not even close anymore.
So as it stands right now, the permit is the permit. It's right until the permit is open for a modification, until it's out there. It's unfortunately what stands, right? So I can't tell you what to prepare for, right? I can only tell you that the permit is what is currently being used.
Is the
Just
state
answer, not
looking
answer.
it out on if there's a historical treatment protocol that's been there?
So there's a lot of information that we found out after we went final with this permit, including these injection systems. So we've all been coordinating together to figure out how to incorporate these into the permit. Now I can't speak to a time frame in which this modification will come out, but what I can say is that I assume NJ Cola has an email list of everyone here, which I would like to have, and when the draft is issued, you will all get an email with the PDF of the draft. After that is issued, you get a 30-day public comment period, which you can submit any comments that you have on any of the information within that draft to the department, which we will respond to and we will consider when we issue the Master General Permit final.
I have a quick question with the pre-monitoring, and this might apply to a lot of people here, but if someone wants to put in an application, could they use data from, say, like last year that they may have collected for the pre-treatment information for the permit, if they want to get that permit in and up and running?
So I'm going to use my favorite phrase, it depends, right? It depends on the product, right? And
Okay.
it's a conversation I think we would probably have to have, like, via email. So if you were emailing me saying, hey, we want to use, like, let's say alum, right? I would say probably not, because the data is probably too far in the extreme, right?
Yeah.
But if you wanted to say, hey, we want to use like, muck-away, or we want to use like something like a biologics, the data is probably still, within that range. But it's a conversation that we can have.
And then just one more quick question with the pre-treatment. And again, I don't know if anyone's using Utrazor, but any of those products very frequently, they grab samples of the sediments to get the amount of labile phosphorus in the sediments. Could that data be used if it was conducted, if that data was collected the previous year?
For a continual Utrazorb application or for a different product?
For
Okay.
Utrazorb. Like last year they were
Yeah.
using it because we have a number of clients that have used it. And
Right.
now all of a sudden they're like, holy cow, now we have to put a permit in.
So I will get back to you on that one.
Okay.
Right. So my inkling is probably not, but it's definitely something that we can talk about.
Okay.
Okay.
Please include me on that.
Thank you. Any other questions? We'd love to discuss more, or talk about algae or cyanobacteria. Thank you all.